Hi John, and let's break down your animations. So, we'll start with looking at the sketches and concepts. So the overall idea is there. For this part, for the sparks, you can make it more dynamic and maybe slightly adjust the angles, but overall it's fine. So maybe push it a bit to one side, add some variety here and there, maybe more interesting part here, and you'll be fine. For the dissipation of the particles, it would be more interesting to have some variety in the particles, because all the particles here are very similar in terms of size and shape. So moving on to the actual animations. First we have sparks, and the sparks overall are quite good. You've got the motion figured out, and the consistency is there as well. So good job on this. Let's look at the frames and see if there are some problems with spacing. You see here it kind of slows down and then accelerates again. Here it goes, accelerates, decelerates, 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 and it's mostly fine. Again we have deceleration, and it's mostly consistent. It may be slightly inconsistent here, as it goes slightly to the right and then slightly to the left, and then stops and goes to the right again. To the left, to the right, straight up. So here it kind of slows down and accelerates a bit. Slows down and disappears. Again, slows down, disappears. So overall it's quite good. Next up, we've got this nice animation. So overall the animation is quite good. Maybe it lacks a bit of masses in between, because here we've got this kind of mass, and when it breaks up we've got a huge part here, a bit of repeating particles here, kind of similar size, similar form, similar direction, and they kind of break up into particles in the same way and at the same time. Again, too similar, and these are very similar between each other. That's why they're less interesting. And the same thing here, so it kind of breaks up into particles very evenly, so it's the same form that was here before, and it is exactly like this here, so everything kind of breaks up into thirds, or it breaks up at the same time into kind of similar shapes. So it's better to have some delay, to have some difference in timing between one part and the other part breaking into particles. It will make it more natural and interesting. It's also better not to keep the same shapes right next to each other with the same motion. So it goes for this mass here, starting on this frame, and this mass here. And you see it kind of forms a triangle here with the same shapes. I would also probably keep some connection to this mass or some masses in between at this frame, so that we don't have this kind of huge empty space afterwards. Another slight problem is that we get kind of a repetition between the top part and the bottom part. So we get this scene, we've got this scene before, and we got the same scene at the top 2 frames later. To solve that, we can have a variety in size and some shapes connecting it here, breaking it into more interesting form. As for the spacing, overall it's quite good. We can make it more interesting by giving more dynamic motion to the bottom part, because the bottom part kinda lacks the impulse at the moment, because it goes very fast here, and here it barely moves, and it's not very consistent on some frames. So let's break it down. Goes 1, okay, the bottom part only. Goes 1, 2, 3. You see the spacing is kind of the same. No huge acceleration or no significant acceleration, no noticeable deceleration either. Sudden slowdown, acceleration, a bit acceleration, sudden slowdown, slowdown again, acceleration, acceleration to the side, slowdown, acceleration, acceleration to the side, okay, slowdown. So you see it kinda gets a bit messy with slowdowns and accelerations. Goes in this direction, slows down, accelerates in this direction, slows down. For these particles, again, the motion kinda seems very small, then it accelerates a bit, slows down just a bit, suddenly slows down a lot, and even more. So maybe you can add more spacing at the beginning, like a faster acceleration and then deceleration. Here you see the direction changes. The form changes a bit, then we decelerate in a different direction, so it stops there, accelerate all over, decelerate again. And this particle goes in this direction, then suddenly goes to the left at the end. This particle kind of gets less interesting as it has dynamic shape here, and it would be nice to have some dynamics or some twisting, some rotation in particles at the end here. It's not necessary, it will just make it a bit more interesting. Again, let's look at the forms. We have some deceleration and then suddenly we accelerate. Then we decelerate again. Decelerate. Accelerate in some places. Decelerate. Then again we accelerate a bit, especially here, and a bit here. Decelerate. Accelerate a bit here. Accelerate and change the form. So there are some places where we can improve spacing here, here, and here, and towards the end. And we can make it more interesting by changing the forms, adding some variety here and there, and thinking more about the composition. Okay, next up. So, you see how the contour twitches at the end slightly? That happens because the forms change between frames too fast, the contours of the forms. As for the explosion, we can make it faster to create more interesting dynamics and spacing. The form also have like a bit even motion, so you see it kind of feels like it moves to the camera, like everything is expanding between these frames, not directionally, but rather almost as if it zooms in, because you expand all the parts evenly. So you see, very even, slightly faster. Again, not much difference in spacing. Here we'll get a slowdown. Again, everything kind of expands evenly in all directions. This spacing is very similar, and this spacing. Here we have a slowdown. Again, here we have a sudden acceleration. Then you see everything expands evenly to the side. With acceleration, here we have some deceleration. And the expansion rate is very even here, on the sides. Here we have a slowdown, acceleration here a bit, And you see this part is very even. Then we have a sudden deceleration, and it kind of moves evenly but with a slower spacing. And then you see forms change from frame to frame hugely. The contours change very chaotically. So it goes to the side, to the other side. And that's why the motion is slightly inconsistent at the end. Because the contours, all the outlines, are changing very chaotically from frame to frame. These bumps and creases. And so again, very sudden acceleration, sudden slowdown. So there's not enough, still not enough difference, and there are maybe too many frames for So you see we've got two parts. The spacing here is very similar, and the spacing here is very similar and gets only smaller here. And that's why it feels very even. To make it more punchy and stylized, I would have more frames more closer to each other here, then a very fast acceleration, or even a bigger acceleration, and then a faster slowdown. That way you will create more contrast in motion, and it won't look as even. As for the holes, they kinda just go very fast and then suddenly stop their motion. So you see, no motion, so the holes start moving, and then the motion kinda stops, continues again, stops, and stops completely. So it was like one frame acceleration, and then suddenly the motion of the hole gets a bit less consistent, stops, gets less consistent, stops. And that's a bit distracting. So again, very fast acceleration, very fast deceleration, then we move at the same speed, suddenly stop. We suddenly stop, and then it breaks into particles. But that sudden stop, that sudden slowdown, and that sudden deceleration doesn't really work for this kind of explosion. I would like make the motion of the holes more consistent and a bit longer, and let them erase out some of the shapes more. Maybe add some rotation there as well to make it more interesting. You also see how the shadows kind of suddenly pops in, so it accelerates, decelerates, accelerates, goes back, decelerates, suddenly accelerates, decelerates. So the shadow is all over the place. So it goes faster, slower, faster, slower. So here it stays in one spot, suddenly accelerates, slows down, accelerates, slows down, goes forward, suddenly slows down, goes forward. and so on. That's why it's very inconsistent. And the shape of this light layer also changes from frame to frame. Goes 1, 2, then goes 3, then goes 4. You see, it's all over the place. Goes like here, it goes forward, goes to the left part, goes to the right part, goes to the left part again. So it goes here, goes to the right, goes to the left again, goes to the right again, goes to the left again. So it's in constant movement from side to side, from side to side. And you see how the holes here are very even, so they expand on the same frame with almost the same speed, same spacing, and that also makes it a little bit less appealing, because we get less variety in motion, and the shapes itself are very similar as well. So these shapes are very symmetrical, these shapes can have some symmetry to them, and this shape is clearly symmetrical, and it breaks into symmetrical particles. So you can just make it more interesting by adding some variety to it, by not making particles of the same size next to each other, like here and here, here and here, here and here. It makes it less appealing, and you can make them more interesting to keep it more interesting. Like keep an interesting composition, keep an interesting shapes. Here all these particles are kind of lining up with the same spacing. The spacing, I mean. You can try getting some of this motion. Maybe deleting some frames to make the first part faster. The thing is that you can add the difference in the motion as well. So you can first accelerate these parts without making everything more bulky and like wider. Start slowing it down and only then start increasing the sides of the shapes even more. Let's see. this clearly doesn't slow and solve every problem, but it solves some of the problems with the contrast of speed and spacing between the first and the second half. So I just removed some frames, only left some of these frames, and transform this frame and this frame. This frame is closer to this frame, and this frame is also smaller, so that we have a more noticeable deceleration. Acceleration. It's still a bit inconsistent because I haven't changed all the other frames, and because direction and the spacing here changes so much, but it has more contrast for the first half. And pay attention to the motion of the inner shapes. Suddenly goes here, suddenly goes back. And of the contours. So you see the contour goes very bumpy here. Suddenly moves to the left. Suddenly goes more bumpy to the right. Suddenly all the mass moves up. Suddenly it stops. Suddenly it moves forward, and it's very rectangular. So let's break down the next animation. Again, it's a bit too even, both for the sparks and for the explosion. Let's see. So it goes like this, goes like that, goes like this, goes like that. And you can already notice that it's slightly inconsistent in some parts here, and you can have a more noticeable contrast to make it more punchy, to make it more interesting. Can hear it barely moves, slows down, and you keep it for quite a lot of time. And you can exaggerate the spacing even more. For the sparks at least. You see, very even here, and then sudden deceleration to deceleration, no deceleration, like this. So you can exaggerate it on the first frame and go like this. And you can exaggerate it for the ends as well. So you can exaggerate it for the holes as well. Because the holes are also very important. So you can have something like acceleration, push it even further, and then start slowing it down to let them fly a bit further and to make them shorter faster. Again, You can exaggerate the acceleration here and have faster slowdown. Again, slightly inconsistent. As for the explosion itself, it's also a bit even for the main part of the motion. So it starts quite well. Then it slows down. And the motion here could be more exaggerated and could have more difference for the slowdown. So you see, it slows down and then it continues moving with the same kind of spacing for a bit too long. Go slowly forward, slowly forward. Suddenly slows down completely. Goes like this, slightly accelerates. So you see, it kind of retains the motion for too long. So what you can do, you can accelerate it even faster. So here you can have something like this, something like that afterwards, something like this, and then slow it down almost completely, instead of having a lot of frames with kind of very similar motion. It also would be nice to have more variety in the hulls, because these hulls, they all appear and move at the same time, and they also very symmetrical and very repetitive, in the sense that this is essentially repeating and the motion of the hulls is very evenly spaced. You see that it kind of has the same, more or less the same rate of motion. And that's why it's not so interesting, because it doesn't have this push at the start or some other kind of more interesting changes in motion to make it more appealing.